Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for our July Scrutiny session. I think some people are running slightly late, but we're going to make a start anyway. We'll move on to item 1 quickly, which is apologies. Alice, are there any?
So we've got apologies from Councillor Paula Dunn, Councillor James Bride substituting for her, and we've been informed that Councillor Carrace and Councillor Jarvis will be late, although I'm aware others will be. And we've also got apologies from Councillor Susan Brown, who's the Cabinet Member for the Oxfordshire Inclusive Economy Partnership item, but officers will cover that item.
Great, thank you. And did anyone have any declarations of interest for the meeting tonight? No, we all good? Amazing. So for item 3, I don't have any chair's announcements, so I think we can go straight on to item 4, which is I need to ask you all if you are happy to approve the minutes from last month's meeting, and if anyone has any amendments at all, do let me know. Nope. In that case, are we happy to approve those minutes, and can someone second that? Yeah, Lizzie. Yeah. Do we vote? No, good. Okay, perfect. Then those are approved. In this case, we can then move on to item 5, which is the Sorry, we're going to do some slight jiggling of the agenda so that we can try and sort of make best use of officer and cabinet members' time. So would everyone be happy with us taking items 7, 8 and 9 next, and then doing the items 5, 6 and 10 at the end of the agenda, just to sort of make things easier for officers? Yeah, cool. In that case, we will move on to the next item, which is the safeguarding report and safeguarding policy. So I think we've got Shyster, Peter Matthew, Ian Wright, Richard Adams and Laura Jones joining us. Shyster, if you want to introduce the report, do go ahead.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. And Lucy, can I say I'm very impressed with your very efficient chairing. So well done. Thank you very much for rejigging the agenda as well. So I'm here with my officer colleagues to introduce the Safeguarding Cabinet Report Scrutiny. So this is an annual report that goes to Cabinet. It sets out how Oxford City Council fulfills its statutory safeguarding duties by outlining the multi-agency safeguarding arrangements in Oxfordshire, by sharing the results of the Safeguarding Self-Assessment Audit 2022, and by highlighting the key achievements and progress made in relation to safeguarding work delivered by the council. The report's there's lots of detail for you to read through. What we're basically asking you to do is to approve the report. As I've said in the introduction, this is an annual report, so it's produced every year. There are no real major shifts in terms of what's new to this report, apart from some of the processes, which again are outlined clearly in the document itself. So I'll keep my introduction short and sweet, and if there's any questions or if officers want to come in, please do.
Was there, did officers want to add anything, or do you want to go straight on to questions from committee? No? In that case.
To move to questions from committee.
Yeah, okay, great. James, do you want to come in? Okay, sorry, Lizzie, and then we'll go on to James. And if you've got a bunch of questions, if you try and ask them, like, bundle them up together, that'd be great.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. So I think it noted that one of the targets to look at this year, I think for this coming year in the report, was about whistleblowing and the whistleblowing culture plan. And I just wondered why sort of concerns and allegations about another member of staff seems to, I don't know, in some ways it seemed to lie between the whistleblowing report, policy and the safeguarding policy. And I wondered if there was any work going on about streamlining that. Maybe some of how you're planning to sort of do that. Is it by another kind of similar staff survey like the other one outlined in the report? And then on the safeguarding champions, how much time they have to give, and that's, I'm assuming, on top of their original and initial roles, and whether that gets at all complicated if I don't know, you don't want these things to happen, but if there was a concern about a safeguarding champion and someone needed advice on how to sort of report that, or wasn't quite sure on the whistleblowing policies. And finally, so on the regularity of training, how deep is the safeguarding awareness briefing? Is that basically like top-up training, or is that more of, here are some of the issues that we're particularly facing, and is there a new briefing every time the procedures change? So in that case, if the procedures changed twice in 2 years, would it stop being biannual and would it become annual? Sorry, I realise now that's quite a lot, but that's my set of questions.
Great. I don't know if Shyster or officers, or I think Richard wants to come in on that one.
Do you want me to take some of those? So the first one, around the alignment of other policies, and there's a safeguarding allegations policy and a whistleblowing policy, and we're working with HR at the moment just to update them and make sure that they connect properly, because they are so intrinsically linked about protecting whistleblowing as well as making allegations around safeguarding. So that's kind of the reference around joining those policies, not together, but making sure that they align properly, and we're going through that process with HR colleagues at the moment. In terms of the safeguarding champions, Laura's probably a better place to answer that question, but it is part of it's part of their core, well, not part of their core role. They volunteer to become champions and they get additional training for it and regularly meet up and share good practice. And Laura kind of coordinates that, so she can give a little bit more detail in a second. And similarly with the basic training, really good question. When there are trends that we identify, maybe through our own reporting systems like My Concern, or that come down from the safeguarding boards, that is imparted into our basic training. And again, Laura can explain how that's been reviewed recently and actually extended slightly in terms of time to be able to fit additional content into it. So and how that is delivered as well internally. So I'll just hand over to Laura on the safeguarding champions and the training element.
Thanks, Richard. So in terms of the time given, we ask champions to attend a quarterly meeting led by myself, and all of the champions attend, minimum of 3 per year, but most of them do attend all. That's for about an hour and a half, and we talk through any new kind of news items, updates nationally, locally. A particularly interesting part, which we spend a lot of time on, is recent scenarios, how to deal with them, sharing best practice. We asked them to complete the safeguarding awareness briefing and also the level 2 and level 3 training for adults and children. So they are highly trained. We also asked them to attend as many additional courses as they can. So that might be neglect, domestic abuse, lots of trauma-informed courses have been released recently. With regards to allegations against a possible champion, our policy and the allegations policy state that we would like any allegations to go to a designated safeguarding lead, unless of course that is against a designated safeguarding lead. So we wouldn't expect any staff allegations to come to a champion. We would like those to go to a designated safeguarding lead. If a champion does become aware of that, then they will signpost the member of staff to a designated safeguarding lead. With regards to the training, it's an introduction to safeguarding. So we cover what neglect and abuse looks like. Hopefully all of the councillors have attended the training as well. I think everyone has, certainly all of the new councillors this year. What neglect and abuse looks like, how to report it, what the Oxfordshire safeguarding boards do, how we fit into that, and who's there to support you with any concerns you might have, and also some pastoral support for the staff as well. If anything changes nationally, locally, the trainers meet quarterly to update the training materials, And as Richard mentioned, we recently extended it from an hour to an hour and 15 minutes because we recognised that actually there wasn't quite enough time to discuss issues. We have scenarios within that as well, so that generates a lot of discussion about best practice again. We ask each attendee to complete an evaluation after they attend. Those are checked by myself and responded to if anyone's unsure of anything. And as you mentioned, the annual safeguarding questionnaire, we use that to inform the safeguarding training materials as well. Hopefully that answers your questions.
Great, thanks Laura and Richard. James, do you want to go next for questions?
This one works. Sorry. I had two questions. One is if you go to, I've written down paragraph, I can't remember, it's paragraph or point 2526, which is about child exploitation. In the past, we've often had discussions about language schools, summer schools, and you can now see loads of foreign students here. I just wonder, they're not mentioned anywhere specifically in the safeguarding paper. I just wonder, are they dealt with elsewhere? Have they fallen between the cracks? I wondered where that was. The other thing, which was partly looking at the officers who were responsible for particular topics, and it's lovely to see Ian and Richard, who I'm sure joined the council before I did, so there's nice continuity, but I know Danny Granito has gone, and she's down as having responsibility for at least one area. I just wonder how you're managing on staffing and retention. And by the way, I know Helen is giving a paper to Audit and Governance about it, but this is relevant very much to this topic. Thank you.
And was that one for officers or Shyster, do you want to answer?
I'm happy to come in if that's helpful. So
Yes,
in terms
please.
of child exploitation, I'm a member of the Oxfordshire Safeguarding Children Board Child Exploitation Subgroup, which is chaired by the local police superintendent in Oxford, but covers the whole of Oxfordshire. In terms of language schools safeguarding specifically, that's clearly the responsibility of the individual schools. But what the safeguarding, what the CE subgroup gets is a prevalence report every quarter. So we look at trends in reporting, we look at the nature of child exploitation, and that subgroup's actually been expanded over the last probably 4 or 5 years to include drug exploitation and responding to the kind of the county lines and local organised crime group exploitation of young people. So it's broadened out from its original purpose, which was the child sexual exploitation subgroup, to incorporate a wider range of exploitation issues that are prevalent in the city and in the county. So if anything is picked up through language schools, through the reporting system, then they will be engaged with. But in terms of responsibility for their own safeguarding practice, that's definitely something that they're involved in. The preventative work with language schools and their safety in the nighttime economy, for example, is discussed regularly within police night safe meetings. So there's the preventing safeguarding issue element to it, but the response bit would be the school's own responsibility. And then in terms of resourcing, yeah, you'll see in the cabinet report that the responsibility for corporate responsibility for safeguarding came into under Ian's service area, and Laura transferred from partnerships and policy team to community safety, which I think it's a really sensible move. I think in terms of the kind of two sides to the community safety coin, safeguarding plays a hugely important role. Regulatory service and community safety are one of the main users of my concern and come across an awful lot of safeguarding issues, but also lead on preventative programs like the domestic abuse accreditation work, modern slavery and exploitation officer within my team, etc. So, but it's a very busy topic, and Laura's work program is really extensive. But I feel that that infrastructure is in place, for safeguarding to continue to be successful within the council. So I hope that answers your question. In terms of picking up Danny's role, there is a specific role that she had representing the district councils on the safeguarding boards. I've picked that up, so I represent the council on the full board meetings, but Cherwell have picked up attending on behalf of district council to a number of the subgroups underneath those boards. I still go to the child exploitation subgroup meeting because of its clear connection to community safety issues. So yeah, that responsibility has been passed over to Cherwell. But in terms of the internal management of safeguarding, that's now come over to me.
Great, are you happy with that, James?
I just wondered, I mean, would it be that, again, if you wander outside now, you'll see loads of what I don't think are language school students. I think they're probably school groups coming for a number of days and then they go back. Are they picked up anywhere in terms of safeguarding? I mean, where would they be covered? Is it the responsibility of the, I imagine they're often doing school exchanges or something. I mean, how would they be picked up?
So just jumping in there, James, I can go away and find more information out about it. And I don't want to say anything that isn't quite accurate, but I know from working with language schools in the past, if the person is a child under 18, then the property and the family in which they're staying with is assessed by the school as part of the safeguarding policy, but I can get more confirmation on that for you. So I'll take that away.
Laura, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I'd just like to mention the Oxfordshire County Council Education Safeguarding Advisory Team are open to support language schools in any places of education. So they are able to provide that service. And we work closely with the LADO and these Education Safeguarding Advisory Team.
Great, thanks. So I think Altaf first and then Chris afterwards.
Thank you. My question is very much similar to the last year. I do understand that this fills or ticks the boxes which the City Council need to do, and it is multi-agency work. I all do understand that. So I do just wanted to pinpoint here, is this organization, City Council, works with the voluntary sectors or the groups, and do the council working with those organizations, do they ask, do they have safeguarding policy in place? Do they try to train and get help or support? Because I lived here for almost my life, and I've seen what happened in the county in past decade and how this safeguarding area is being developed. And there are so many panels, advisory boards, so much of bureaucratic layers in multi-agencies, but there are still misses in a way. Things are not right in a way. And if you talk to the council at that time, they would say, oh, it's nothing to do with us about their governing process or whether they are up to governing level or not. It's not our duty, but we do fund them, we do work them. And if we are giving funding or working for the betterment of the city, because some organizations are important to work with. And if we are not asking this question, then I think there is a clear miss from the City Council and similarly county education team, other people who are working with the voluntary organization and other organization where this safeguarding issue comes, they should be doing the same thing. So yes, is fine, the policy every year is being renewed, all the boxes will be ticked. We are all fine, but if the interest is to safeguard vulnerable children, other people in the city, and if we want to get to the bottom of this, then what is the mechanism? I never understood from the last year questions, still same here. And as I said, I can name, but I don't think it's appropriate to name the organization or the people I have spoken and worked with. But it is always very much of bureaucratic answers. Oh, we don't deal with this. It's not over area. This not over area. This not over area. But there are issues there. So if we wanted to deal these issues, can't we just say that we will not work with the organization who hasn't got the safeguarding policy on board, who are not willing even to accept a policy and take some training and take some advice, but one area is ignored and other area is worked, and just to say, well, we are working with the communities and everybody. So that's where we are, and that's my comment.
There was a question that I had that's maybe linked to that, which was, I think something about the policy has changed for this year, but I wasn't entirely clear on what it was. So maybe if we could answer Altaf's question, but also about like what the difference is here and why that change has been made, kind of all in one, that would be great.
Okay. So Laura and I have had a long discussion about exactly Altaf's point. And in terms of procurement, yes, we do ask whether people have got a safeguarding policy. I guess the question is actually, how good is that policy? And is it the council's, does the council have the ability to vet it and take responsibility for the safe, or partial responsibility for the safeguarding approach of the organisation that we're funding? And it's quite a difficult thing to do. But I absolutely take Altaf's point. If we are commissioning organisations for the purpose of, for example, providing youth activities in the city, then we need to be very, very sure and very, very clear that they also have policies that align to the multi-agency safeguarding arrangements in Oxfordshire County Council, that their staff are trained in safeguard OSCB training, just like we are. So it's an area of work that we're currently looking into harder and just trying to navigate where our responsibility lies in terms of advice, i.e., well, the council said it was okay, so it's okay. We don't want to be in that position. We want to encourage people to reach into the safeguarding boards and make sure that they are as safeguarding aware and able to respond as we are. So yes, Altaf, that is a piece of work that we are just reviewing at the moment, and we've had some pretty long and detailed conversations about it. Most of the organisations that I've worked with in my role, I am confident, because I've been doing it for a number of years, and I know that they are integrated within our own teams, like Youth Ambition, for example. But I think it's a really fair challenge, and I don't want to make any statement today, but I want to go away and check that, and if necessary, add it to our safeguarding action plan. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Great. Was there anything else on that from officers or Shyster, or are we all good? Sounds
no,
like
I think it's a really important question that's been asked. It's a fair challenge, as Sir Richard has said. So we will do a bit more work and then come back with a clearer response on that one. And then Laura, if you could just outline the sort of the process change.
Yes, certainly. The only significant changes we have to the policy this year is the governance and the accountability and responsibility of the Executive Director of Communities and People, and then responsibility with Ian, the Head of Regulatory Services and Community Safety. The Commission Services point that Altaf's just made is much the same in the policy as it has been previously. We've not made any significant changes to that part.
And can I just add something as well? So the policy has probably looked shorter than it did before. We've taken out the procedure element to it, and that's a separate kind of document. So it's, and I think it just reads in a slightly more structured way. But yeah, the main thing is about how have we structured our safeguarding response in terms of a hierarchy within the organisation, and then how do we make sure that our staff are trained and capable and confident of responding to safeguarding needs. So yeah, it's built on previous years, nothing particularly substantial, but I hope it's a clearer read.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to come to Chris in a moment, but whilst we're talking about it being clearer, the policy is pretty long, and I just wondered is there like an easy access version or like a summary if you're trying to encourage staff, like as many staff to be aware of it as possible? Is there a version of this that's, you know, just has the key steps and key contacts and stuff? Yeah, or is there just this long full version?
So there isn't a kind of an executive summary of this. What there is that staff tend to refer to as a procedure document. So they'll have all have had the introductory training as Laura talked about, and some of them will have had heightened training depending on their role. But really, in terms of responding to safeguarding and knowing when and how to respond, it's the combination of the training and the procedure. And the procedure does kind of walk you through what you need to be doing, because that's important. You want to make sure that you get it right and that you capture the information that you need to capture and you report it to the right people. So there isn't really a summary of the policy as such, but the more practical tool is the procedure document.
Great, thank you. Oh, Laura, sorry, did you want to kind of?
Yes, can I also add that there is a version of a summary on our intranet page, which we do share widely and is in newsletters and communications. So that's a place that staff can go to for a kind of quick links of what to do.
Great, that sounds like a useful document. Chris, did you have more questions?
Sure, thank you very much. I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit about what the report had to say about adult exploitation. So it noted there that there were 36 adults that were, I think it just phrased it as removed from exploitative situations. I just wondered if you could elaborate a bit on what sort of situation people are being removed from and what assistance we're able to provide when people are removed from them. Like, are we able to provide alternative housing? What sort of shelter are we able to provide in those circumstances?
Sure. So that section is under the adult exploitation part of the report, and it deals with the work of Nicola Bell, who's in the community safety team, and she's the anti-slavery coordinator. So she came into post last year and set up some pathways of reporting, partnership-based pathways to report cases and incidents of adult exploitation, and then a multi-agency case management approach to that. So it's very much bringing together relevant organisations to assess the nature of the exploitation and then action plan it. So there's not a lot of specific detail in the types of removal from exploitation, but the key themes were around brothels, adult sex working and adult sexual exploitation. There is some domestic servitude cases in there, and some around the kind of care profession as well. Now, that removing from will be liaising with the victim, and it could be related to housing and temporary accommodation, working with housing colleagues, but it could be supporting them to access benefits and the ability to remove and get themselves away from that exploitative practice. So there's, and it's actually a really impressive setup that Nicola's created, with a huge multi-agency response to it, working with DWP, Job Centre, the GLAA, the Home Office, a whole raft of different organisations. I'm sure she'd be really happy to actually come and talk to any councillors that are interested in that area of work. But yeah, I spend some long and fascinating hours talking to Nicola about the cases and how she manages them. But that's what that's referring to, is the adult exploitation work that the anti-slavery coordinator is doing.
Thanks, Richard. Just following up on that, I think on page 49 it talks about there having been 60 cases of adult exploitation since the council started recording it centrally. How long is that time period?
So those 60 cases will be Nicola's case management work. So she started last year, and the previous post holder, the focus was really on prevention work and publicity and campaigns. And when Nicola came into post, one of the key elements that I added to the job description was disruption activity around exploiters. Hence, she set up the system. So the 60 is her data set that she collates partnership reports from and helps manage those cases. So that's what we're talking about. That was since the beginning of last year.
Sorry, is that a number that you'd think is high, or is that average? I've got absolutely no idea how many cases you would expect that to be. I
mean, it's often called a hidden harm, adult exploitation and child exploitation. So it's very, very underreported and difficult to kind of put a finger on. The Home Office do publish statistics that talk about, I think this the last count last year was about 16,000 victims of modern slavery in Britain, or in England and Wales, reported through the National Referral Mechanism, which is a very specific method of reporting. Other organisations have estimated up to 130,000 people. So it's a very difficult number to put your finger on. But I suppose what I'm impressed with is the ability of agencies to identify and then collate that information and bring it to a central point to action plan and problem solve in a multi-agency way. That's probably 60 more people than it was the year before. So, you know, I couldn't tell you what percentage that is of the total problem, but every day, every week, Nicola is having more incidents reported to her. And some of it's modern slavery and some of it's exploitation. There's a slight subtle difference, but, you know, exploitative wage practices, for example, or working conditions and things like that. And then if you add the kind of coercion element into it, then it gets more and more sophisticated. And she does work with Thames Valley Police, with Serious Organised Crime Unit. Yeah, so kind of has the finger on the pulse of knowing what we can know. But I'm not sure about whether that's a large amount or whether it's just a very small number of a much bigger problem.
Thanks. Okay, we've got, I'm going to go, is yours following up, Chris, or is it a separate question? Okay, Chris, you first then.
Thank you. Relating to that, do we have longitudinal information about people who've been helped out of exploitative situations in the past, and to what degree people are sort of repeat victims, and to what degree the assistance provided is able to sort of change the course of their life. And I don't know, would it be the council that would be gathering that longitudinal information, or is that another organisation's purview?
It's a really good question. I don't think we're at the position at the moment to really understand or undertake any kind of longitudinal study on the cases that we're aware of, because they're only quite recent. But I can find out from Nicola whether we have had repeat victimization of the people that she's identified as helping out of exploitation, bearing in mind this is, you know, 12 months on rather than something much longer. I guess the other question is the difficulties around that the person may decide to move to another part of the country, and it's quite difficult to therefore to track them. I mean, there's a really good case study of a gentleman that was being exploited. His property was taken over by drug dealers in a part of the city. He was physically abused. He was forced to sell drugs, and he disclosed to a member of the Community Safety Service, and we got him into the National Referral Mechanism. He is now living in another part of the country. He's free from substance misuse, and he's in a job, and he's really enjoying himself, and he stays connected with us and gives us updates on that. So it's a very specific case. I don't know how representative it is, but those are the sort of success stories that make you do the job that we do. So yeah, in short, the longitudinal study for local data is quite difficult, but I will speak to Nicola about that.
Chair, I imagine you're already doing this, but could I ask, can we phrase a recommendation around formalizing such a longitudinal study in the future?
Yeah, we can add that to the list. Yeah. Peter, did you have your hand up to come in?
Sorry, Chair, I did. I was just about to say, I understand Richard's point about the longitudinal study, but I think your point about contextualizing the data in paragraph 32, 31, 32, 33, I think it's something we should take away, because I think that's I think that's a correct point, because without that context, it's just 60, and 60 doesn't mean much without a bit of context. So I think we should take that away to actually add that into the report.
Maybe we can have a recommendation on that bit as well then. Moving on, Mike, do you have a question?
Oh, it sounds from the figures you quoted, Richard, that the number of cases reported in the city, thanks to Nicola's hard work, no doubt, is about 50% above the national average, as reported by the Home Office, but that it's thought there are a significant number a significant number more cases that have still not been detected, hidden harm, as you say, in the difficulties around finding very vulnerable people and getting them to report, which we all know. But yes, setting that in context would I think be very useful, as you say, Peter.
Great, thanks, Mike. I don't know if anyone wanted to respond to that, or if we might have covered that in previous things we said. Yeah. I'm going to say that I'm going to ask a question next. We should probably also move on soon, as we've got quite a few other things to discuss. But first of all, could I just ask around domestic abuse? Because I know Scrutiny in the past had a review group looking into domestic abuse. And it talks about the domestic abuse housing accreditation, I think it is, process that the council is trying to go forward with. And so I wondered what that process involved, and was there any way that Scrutiny or members could feed into that at all?
Laura, happy to do a double act whenever you want to jump in. So the DAHA accreditation is being, there's a corporate steering group for it, and there's a project group, and Liz Jones, who is the antisocial behaviour investigation team manager and our lead for domestic abuse, is leading on the project in the round. We've just recruited a project coordinator, so Dawn Thompson, a very experienced domestic abuse support worker who used to be one of our link workers in housing for domestic abuse. So that project is continuing. It is based on 8 standards, which the accreditation requires us to adhere to. A lot of housing related work, but not just housing. It's a corporate, across the organisation project. And I'm sure that Liz will be very happy to come to Scrutiny and an update on progress. There's a project plan clearly, which we could update on. But yeah, it's the adherence of those standards, and you have to do an assessment first, identify where your gaps are, and then develop an action plan to fill in those gaps to achieve that accreditation. So a huge piece of work, actually, the DAHA accreditation. It's really significant, and because it's across the organisation. And hence it's going to have a 2 to 3 year lifespan of actually implementing it all. But yes, happy to come back to a future meeting if that would be helpful with more detail.
Yeah, I think so. We could, maybe request a scrutiny, report scrutiny on the domestic abuse housing accreditation, and perhaps a wider update on that from the review group that happened before. So if that's if there's no more burning questions from anyone on stuff, I think we can move on to recommendations. If we have as our first one, is everyone happy with the one around domestic abuse and having some more info on that in the future? Yeah, cool. We had some from Chris too. So the one around a longitudinal study of people who have been flagged through the system as being adult exploitation victims. Are people happy with that as a recommendation? Cool. And then also to recommend a little bit of context around the figure of 60 adults too. Everyone happy with that one? Perfect. Were there any more? Was that one of them? Yeah.
Can I say, I know Richard said that we are working and looking into the area I touched. Can we put as a recommendation that the council working with the voluntary sectors and other sort of community groups, we must check their sort of health check first?
Yeah, so something around making sure there's a process for checking that voluntary groups we work with, that their safeguarding procedures are
in
adequate.
place, or they're happy to even get the advice.
Is everyone happy with that as well? Perfect. I think that's everything then on Lizzie.
Could we just add a recommendation about maybe some clarity around what the procedures are for updating staff on changes to the procedures as well? So how it's communicated to them, some of the stuff about the briefing, but also how those reporting changes are reported back.
That sounds good to me, as long as there's no objections. Cool. Yeah, if you got all of that up, great. In that case, thank you very much to Shaista and Richard and Peter and Laura and Ian for coming along and answering all of our questions. I think that's been really helpful and interesting. So we will move on to the next thing now, which is the Oxford Inclusive Economy Partnership. Councillor Brown wasn't able to join for this one, so I think we've got officers. Is it Clayton Lavalin and Emma Coles? Oh, and you're here in person as well, even better. Yeah, if you're able to introduce this, that would be great.
Lovely, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Clayton Lavalin. I'm Economic Development Team Leader at Oxford City Council, and this is Emma Coles, who's Oxfordshire Inclusive Economy Partnership Manager. The Oxfordshire Inclusive Economy Partnership was established by Oxford City Council in 2021, and also more recently, in early this year, we launched a charter and pledge scheme. The partnership is unique in not only in terms of its mandate to tackle inequality across the region, but also in the fact that it's funded and supported by all of the councils in partnership across Oxfordshire, and that each of those respective councils report to the future Oxfordshire partnership overall. I'm going to hand over to Emma to say a little bit more about the background and context of the Oxfordshire Inclusive Economy Partnership, and then I'll say a little bit more about Oxford City Council's role in terms of participating in the charter and the pledges. So thank you.
Thank you, Clayton. Hello, everyone. I'm Emma Coles, Oxfordshire Inclusive Economy Partnership Manager. So the partnership is a group, county-wide group, as Clayton said. We bring together employers, business, education, public sector, community groups, with the key aim to look at how we can reduce the economic inequalities that we face across the county. And we do this through delivery through 4 different groups, through educational attainment, focusing on school readiness up to being level 3 ready, inclusive employment, so looking at the barriers for both employers and employees to getting into employment and helping people to get into the jobs available, social value and procurement, how can we increase the amount of social value through our procurement processes, and keep that money within the county and directed to the people that need it the most, and also through place-based working, so identifying those key areas across the county that are in the greatest need and focusing our projects on that. As Clayton said, we all of the local authorities contribute to the funding of my post and a small pot of money, and everybody else on the partnership provides their time voluntarily. we are chaired by Baroness Jan Royale, who is the principal of Somerville College, and also Jeremy Long, who was previously the chair of Oxlap. And part of our work is about engaging more with businesses and the local authorities and employers across the county. So we have developed a charter, which is a way for people to show their commitment to moving forward, becoming more inclusive organisations. As Clayton said, we launched it in January, and we're very pleased that Oxford City have looked at the pledges, and we're bringing those here to you today to have a look at. So we've set them a group of pledges out through 6 groups around providing fair wages, opportunities to work, sharing resources, recruiting inclusively, and improving training and education attainment. There's 39 different pledges. We're not expecting everyone to sign up to all of them. We want people to look at the ones that fit best with your own organisation. And I'll hand over to Clayton now to talk through the Oxford City pledges.
That's brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so participation in the Charter and the Pledge Scheme for the Oxfordshire Inclusive Economy Partnership is a fantastic opportunity for us at Oxford, both to further our agendas around inclusive economy, but also our corporate objectives around helping to make the city a world-class city for everyone. It's our report going to the Cabinet in July will be to approve and sign off and endorse participation in that scheme, but also a range of pledges against different areas in the overall Charter and its pledges. So around areas of service such as procurement, people, communities, Oxford living wage, amongst many others. And it would be important to note also that as well as Oxford City Council taking part, also Oxford Direct Services and Ox Place are also agreeing to a series of commitments and pledges as part of the scheme. The pledges will allow us to deliver against the pledge commitments within existing budgets. So we'll be able to enhance and add value to the current service provision, but within existing budgets. And also we will report against the progress against each of the pledges annually in line with the reporting for the Oxfordshire Inclusive Economy Partnership. That's to make sure that we're having the impact that we're intending and that also we're progressing as far as we'd like to in terms of furthering the impacts to make the economy more inclusive. So as well as the Cabinet report in July, we've also been undertaking some extensive staff engagement. So we ran a leadership conversation in June, and tomorrow we'll be running a Let's Talk session with staff. And also we've had a range of sessions with unions to engage them around this as well, just to make sure that the pledges that we're signing up to as an organisation reflect people's priorities and their aspirations for the partnership, but also so that we're taking on board people's ideas in order to improve the pledges and to make them more effective longer term, and also helping us to achieve the kind of buy-in and support longer term that we need to make them successful. So the report will go to Cabinet in July, and whilst not presenting any significant risks, financial or legal, they do present some fantastic positive opportunities in terms of making sure that we're capturing best practice of our really good work around inclusive economy, but also that we can raise the profile of that and share it at county-wide level and or national level longer term as well. So we hope that you will join us in supporting our participation in the Charter and the pledges, and look forward to your questions and scrutiny today. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, thanks for presenting that on Susan's behalf too. I think I might start with my questions on this one. The partnership sounds, like a really positive thing, but am I right in thinking that for the council, there's not actually anything new that they're committing to, that all of the things that they're committing to are within existing policies anyway? And then sort of linked to that it's quite difficult because as far as I could tell from a quick Google, there isn't published anywhere what the list of the 39 pledges that they could have signed up to are. So it would be interesting if you could reflect on some of the ones that perhaps the council could have, that would have been relevant to the council that they could have considered signing up to, but which they didn't.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. So in terms of the pledges overall, I believe there's an overall list published on the Future Oxfordshire Partnership website, but absolutely take your point on board about the fact that many, although not all of the pledges that we're signing up to build on existing service commitments. We've done that deliberately in order to enhance the kind of level of impact that we can have, whilst also reducing the concerns about capacity and resource required to deliver them. But many of the areas that are new are adding value to the existing service by making them more inclusive. An example of this might be to consider our community services. So we have fantastic community facilities which we make available to the community, but we don't always make those as flexible or inclusive as they could be in the way that members of the community can access them. So this is a fantastic opportunity for us to really work more proactively to make sure that people are accessing those in an even more inclusive way than they are currently, whilst not adding additional burden in terms of time or resource or capacity to service leads. In terms of each of the actions as well, we'll review those on an annual basis and really welcome the challenge around any kind of gaps there might be or other areas of the 39 pledges overall that we could be making better use of or kind of using as opportunities to improve our practice. So it'd be really good to kind of review those regularly and make sure that the priority pledges that we've accepted are the best possible ones in terms of impact for our work and keep kind of continually reviewing that. So yeah, thank you. I don't know if you wanted to add to that, sorry, I dived in.
That's okay, just to say that there is an OIEP charter page specifically as we sit at currently underneath the FOC website. We are in the process of getting our own website, which should be available from September, October time, where there is a separate charter page and there is a link in there that takes you to the full set of pledges, but I'm happy to share that with you all after this meeting if that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, that clearly didn't come up in my very quick Google of it when I was reading the things. Great, so I think we've got Chris and then other Chris and then James. So yeah, I want to go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So on the list, on the sort of the roads not taken, so I did find the list. I think I found it there was a Google form that was like sort of pledge here and had tick boxes for each of the 39. And so even assuming that this is, given that there's no financial commitment associated here, then this is sort of documenting what we already do. There were quite a few of those where it was quite surprising that they didn't, or they sounded like something where if you'd forced me to bet, I'd have bet quite confidently that we were already doing them. And therefore I'm surprised we didn't tick those boxes. So for example, there was one about incorporating social value into your procurement process. And we do that, right? Like our procurement policy very explicitly talks about I believe it's a 10% weight given to social value. So I'm surprised we didn't tick that box. There's one about fostering flexible working, and we've transitioned massively to flexible working. So I'm surprised we didn't tick that box. So I mean, obviously you can't sit here and go through 39 minus 13 is 26. You can't sit here and account for all 26 as to why the council didn't feel able to tick the box at this point. Would you though be able to give a written response to sort of the status on those other 26 as to why we aren't ticking that box today? And if it's something where we want to get there in the very near future, if there's just some small barriers to getting there, or whether it's something which we don't feel particularly applies to the council as an organisation. Yeah, thank you for that question. It's interesting in terms of the approach. So the way that you described the council not being necessarily able to tick all of the 39, we really encouraged each of the service areas and indeed the partners more broadly for the partnership to sign up to areas where they really wanted to make improvements initially as a good way to get them involved in the charter and get started that then they could then build on in the future. So I just wanted to sort of clarify really that if each of the services or the partners involved in signing up to the charter haven't selected all of those pledges, it shouldn't necessarily be taken as an indication that they're not meeting them or that they're not already doing them, but more that they're focusing on these particular areas as ones they'd like to improve. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add on that. No. Yeah, I guess the other thing to say is that although we've been very careful to select pledges where there's not additional financial or resource burden, we're also focusing on areas where participation in a county-wide scheme in this way will significantly allow us to increase our impact or reach. So another good example is to think about the Oxford Living Wage campaign. So we're working on Oxford Living Wage in the city, and we set up a campaign that's been running for a number of years here on this, But what we're going to do through the charter is also encourage partners countywide to consider the real living wage as a way to lift standards of pay across the county and not just in the city. But also I think it should help us to broaden out our reach in terms of that campaign meeting more employers across the city. Many of the beneficiaries or kind of targeted stakeholders for the charter are employers. So it will be a really good way for us to expand the reach of that particular campaign in the city, but also potentially outside of the city, but also to really deepen and add value to the work that we're doing currently. So I think it really presents a good opportunity to add value, even if they are existing commitments that we're signing up to. So just to press you on one specific there, there's one of the themes where we tick 0 items, which is the one surrounding inclusive recruitment. That was quite surprising because of the fact that there is a very specific report about the inclusivity of the council's recruitment, which is tracked regularly and which the council, to my knowledge, constantly strives to improve. So surely there must be at least one of those things which we want to sign up to. We might want to ask Councillor Chapman about this as well, because I notice he's sort of gesticulating angrily at me from the gallery. Sorry, shall I respond to that? I should just give a moment.
I mean, I think it's probably for officers, unless Nigel's got a burning desire to come in on this.
I'll leave it blank. I'll leave it. Then you can ask me about it.
If we let officers respond, and then Lizzie, do you want to come in after?
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Yeah, just to say, absolutely right. I think there's a lot more that we can celebrate that we're doing very effectively. So recruitment and inclusive recruitment is a really good example of that. So it would be really good to look back at the full 39 and just kind of review those with service leads and make sure that we're not missing too many opportunities in terms of celebrating, as you say, areas where we're already demonstrating good practice, but for whatever reason, they've not been selected as pledges. So I think it'd be really good to take on board that suggestion to review the full 39 and just see if there are other opportunities or roads not taken that we might review and include. So thank you. I welcome that.
Yeah, and Lizzie.
Yeah, just to sort of build on what you're saying, I think, I don't know, I might be putting words in people's mouths here, but I feel like we're almost talking a bit cross purposes, because it seems like I think I'm with you guys on what I understand as when you're signing up to pledges, you're saying it's like a checklist of things I've done. Whereas I think my understanding is we're more treating it as we might have done lots of these things already. Here are the things that we're not actually doing at the moment, or we're not doing as well as we can do, and we want to improve. So you're kind of treating it like an improvement to do this. And you're saying, well, hang on a second, aren't we doing this already? And so, yes, and also yes, but I wonder if there's actually the problem here is maybe a bit more of a comms issue. Sorry, not your comms tonight, but generally a comms issue, and it might be a comms issue that the future or the include whatever it's called needs to look at. So I think that would be to build on that. I'm happy with that recommendation, but to build on that recommendation, my recommendation would be around comms, because I do think that naturally people are going to look at this and say, why aren't we doing these other things, even if we are? So I think it's not yet clear that it's kind of like a to-do list for improvement rather than these are the things that we are doing, if that makes sense.
At the risk of hogging the mic, do you mind if I very briefly respond, Chair?
Go for it.
Thank you. Yes, in brief. What I was kind of expecting to see when we had this sort of list of 39 activities was a sort of a traffic light assessment or something of the sort, to be like, on this one, we think we're in a good place, but we have the following sort of specific intentions to get better. On this one, we think we're in a good place, and to our knowledge, there aren't further actions to do. On this one, we feel like it needs improvement, and here are our actions. And quite conceivably, on this one, we think it needs improvement, but it demands budget. And to do that, and since this paper isn't commissioning a budget, that's something we're going to have to defer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas what we've got is sort of 13 things ticked, and then it looks weird that you've got this entire field of like inclusive recruitment where we're just like none of the above. And what we mean by that is far from clear just from that statement.
Yeah, I think we should definitely have some recommendations around how exactly these are framed. Might be quite useful. I think time to move over to Chris for your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a really, really quick one, really. I guess I'm looking at the pledges around procurement, and they're really, really great in terms of the stuff around buying goods and services from cooperatives, SMEs, living wage organisations, etc. I guess my question really is sort of what the scope is to go slightly beyond what's in that pledge, because for me there's a key thing missing here, which is around unionisation in procurement and ensuring that you use your procurement to support unionised workplaces and workplaces that have a union recognition agreement as a category that is missing from all these lists. So I guess the question is in two parts, really. Like, firstly, what's the scope of going beyond that, including something around, say, for example, buying goods and services from organisations which have trade union recognition agreements, and secondly, I guess the question of why that was omitted in terms of the list of types of organisations that we want to procure from.
Could you just repeat the missing organisations? Sorry.
Sorry, it's specifically about buying from organisations which have a trade union recognition agreement for their workforce, which isn't mentioned in there.
I think that's probably, I mean, these pledges were pulled together by our various working groups, so maybe it's just something that wasn't included within that particular pledge. These were things that people felt were important in terms of the social value and procurement, but I can take that back to the working group. I mean, these are a living document, and just referring back to the pledges, this is the first time we've commissioned and people to sign up to the charter, and so we're really using it as an opportunity, as an engagement tool to really work with organisations to take them on that inclusive economy journey. So we're quite fluid in how people are signing up to pledges. So some people may sign up to more that, as you said, more of a tick box for their organisation, and some are really thinking about which are the ones that we want to really focus on over the next 12 months to improve on. And that will be, it may be different for each organisation, but I work with each of them to provide support throughout that year to signpost them to information to help them develop their pledges and deliver them. And then we monitor it throughout the year. And at the end of the year, we'll create an impact report on the sort of the impact that the pledges have had on both the organisations and the employers, employees, and the communities that they work within. So I hope that clarifies slightly the process we've been through.
And if I might just very briefly add to that, just to say we really welcome the emphasis around union engagement as well. And that's been something from the outset that Councillor Brown has been particularly impressing on us. And so much of the staff and or union engagement has been around making sure that we're taking best possible opportunity where we can to engage with the unions to get feed into those charter pledges. So yeah, thank you, really welcome that.
I think before we go to James, that Mike has a quick follow-up question from this bit.
Yeah, well, trying to pull this together a bit, I suppose. I think we might have revealed some of the perhaps tension, not tension, but the difference between what this partnership is intended to be, a kind of inclusive economy showcase, expanding on the work the council has already done with the living wage campaign and encouraging employers to here is what you can do to sign up to as many things as possible, and necessarily therefore giving an example of what the council is doing in only some of those areas, because that's a piece of work, and a different though related piece of work, which you might call an inclusive economy audit, checking that the council is doing all that it can do to build an inclusive economy in the city across all of these different areas. I hope that we may be moving towards a recommendation that second piece of work should be done in the foreseeable future. Just trying to bring together what colleagues are recommending on that.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think that was useful. James.
I looked, and I think I looked fairly carefully. I couldn't see any specific mention of the council's companies, which are large employers. And I don't know, are they subsumed within the council in terms of the report? Or are they, I feel they probably deserve to be treated slightly separately as large employers, which are self-governing to some extent. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. And yeah, I should have clarified a bit better, really. So as well as the Oxford City Council pledges, there are also separate pledges which are being made by Oxford Direct Services and Ox Place as well. And I think, as you say, it's really important to recognise the opportunities that come from those individual employers operating in the way that they do, which often present additional opportunities to the ones that perhaps we may have in our own right as well. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks. Were there any other questions? Nope. Okay, I think we've got a variety of recommendations to work through. Just a first one that's maybe slightly easier and sits separately. On a sort of slightly transparency matter, could we recommend that the full list of potential 39 pledges is made easily accessible so that everyone can, you know, hold organisations on the council to account on what they haven't signed up for? Because it sounds like both me and Chris have Googled and found it's hidden away somewhere. So maybe it just, we could think about putting it somewhere a bit more prominent. Is everyone happy with that? Yeah, great. I think maybe there's another one around recommending that the council review whether there were opportunities for it to sign up to some of the other pledges that perhaps it is doing, but in this initial process, it didn't sign up for. So perhaps in light of comments today about the, you know, it being a bit odd that none of the inclusive recruitment ones have been signed up to, you could, yes, suggest that that's reviewed. Yep, agreement on that one. Cool. Maybe a recommendation around sort of better comms on what the pledges mean, and this sort of focus on whether or not they're aspirations or things you're already doing. Just perhaps to review kind of the framing of that. I don't know if you've got, Lizzie, yeah, did you want to?
Yeah, I think that, and maybe also, so I think there are, I guess, maybe two recommendations in it. One, looking at sort of maybe taking it back to the inclusive economy partnership, and then also separately considering how we communicate it and we're thinking about the pledges and making sure that's communicated. So if it is a more flexible approach, making sure that's communicated at the partnership level, but then the approach that Oxford City Council specifically is taking, make sure that's communicated. Does that make sense? So
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, Alice is nodding, so hopefully, yeah.
I'm sure Alice can hopefully do some wording and yeah, something. Great. A recommendation around unions and considering whether or not supporting unionisation could be embedded a bit more deeply into those pledges. Would that cover, Chris, what you were talking about?
I think it's probably a recommendation to feed back to the partnership to include trade union recognition agreements as one of the list of types of organisations that have trade union recognition agreements as among the organisations that they preference in procurement.
Yeah. Alice, have you got that? And does anyone object? No. Cool. Sounds good. Mike, did you have one around an inclusive economy audit? Was it?
Yeah,
what you said?
Essentially trying to bring things together by saying that
perhaps something around like maybe we could combine it with the one about, reviewing other pledges might be able to sign, but also saying like some kind of like traffic light audit of the pledges.
Yeah.
Would that work to cover?
Could I try and add a little bit of specificity, even if I can't say it, which should be, so the pledges on the form, they read like wedding vows, in the sense that they read like they're sort of asking you, do you strive to the best of your ability to do this good thing? And much like wedding vows, they read like, generally speaking, your answers to almost all of them should be yes, and maybe NA, if in extraordinary circumstance, which to be slightly less silly, because the council is not a typical organisation. There'll be certain things which are NA to a council, which would be applicable to a different sort of employer or something of that sort. But generally speaking, they all seem like things we should be striving and trying to do to the best of our ability. Quite separately, there are the questions of how well do we think we're doing on these things already, and quite separately again, there's the question of which ones do we intend to give particular focus and time and energy to in the near future. And I think we should answer those questions separately, because at the moment we're asked, do you pledge to the best of your ability to recruit inclusively, and we say and we clearly don't mean that, and yeah, I wouldn't want us to convey that by just sort of taking a pass on that whole field in that array of questions.
So maybe it's the recommendation is review other pledges we could sign, a like RAG rating audit of progress against the pledges generally, and then to identify priorities amongst those pledges, like current priorities. Yeah, is that? Okay, so we're good on that as a 3-part recommendation. Okay, was there anything I missed that people wanted as recommendations? No, and Alice, is that all good? And if you got, yeah, perfect. Cool. Great. In that case, thank you to Clayton and Emma for coming and for answering all of our questions. I feel like we grilled you quite a lot, so apologies for that. But yes, thank you. This has been really interesting. We'll move on to the next item, which is the citizen experience strategy. So we will have Councillor Chapman, Tom Hook, Helen Bishop and Vicky Galvin. Yeah, once you're ready, Nigel, if you're able to introduce the report.
Thank you very much. Just for the record, it's the citizen engagement strategy, not the experience strategy. But that's quite an important difference, actually.
Sorry, I don't know what I called it, but
which we'll come on to, because that's citizen experience is quite a narrow thing. Citizen engagement is a much more comprehensive thing. So that's really part of the difference between the previous strategy, which was called the customer experience strategy, which was also quite a narrow idea, and what we have in front of us tonight. I'll just give a bit of an overview, and then I'm sure Helen, who's worked really hard on this and I think effectively, will want to add more. It's been a number of years since we really looked at this area, and the last time we looked at it was through the narrow prism of customer experience. And by customer, that really means somebody who wants to do a transaction with the council of some kind, so pay their council tax or order a brown bin or something of that kind. And it's really clear to me that while that is the sort of underpinning of a lot of what we do, and it's important we do it well, there's something much bigger and more strategic and more aspirational that we need to look towards, which is, to really improve engagement with us. And engagement with us is also, for me, as much about how do people shape what we do. We're here to provide policies, ideas, services, engagement, but they won't be any good unless we engage really well with the different stakeholders we have. And stakeholders are more than customers. They're citizens, they're businesses, they're individuals, they're students, they're visitors. And it's really important that we do that. And so this policy, this strategy is trying to raise everyone's sights a bit, frankly, away from the narrow to the bigger ambition of the council. I think it's also due for renewal because we've had COVID, which is quite a salutary experience for everybody, of course, but also for the council. It really opened some eyes, I think, in terms of working in localities about the way we need to engage with different groups in a city which is much more diverse than it used to be and increasingly diverse. There's some really good stats in this paper, actually, about the census and what's actually happening. But whilst a lot of that change is very positive, and I love it personally, the diversity of Oxford, there are also some long-standing inequalities that are very persistent. Health and wealth and digital are very persistent inequalities in this city. And so therefore any engagement strategy has to take account of that. And so you're always trying to balance out exploiting technology really cleverly into a digital revolution, which is speeding along very fast, yet not leaving behind people who are not part of that world, who never will be, either because of skills difficulties or cost or whatever it might be. So you have to balance out, face-to-face services, online services, telephony services, and keep those really strong, and then build out from that to engagement, which is less transactional, which is about making sure what we do is as appropriate, relevant, sensible to the needs of citizens as we can. So that's a bit of context about it. You'll see there are sort of 4 pillars: citizen focus, positive experience, inclusivity, and right time, first time, or right first time. I mean, a lot of organizations aspire to the latter. It's quite difficult to do 100% of the time, to be honest with you. But actually, I think when you look at the performance stats, albeit perhaps around the narrower issue of engagement, the more sort of customer side, they're pretty impressive in this council. I mean, the customer excellence stuff we've got for the last 13 years is impressive. A lot of councils would die for that, frankly. And also the stats around face-to-face interaction and telephony interaction are very positive. The weak area is online, which is ironic, actually, because that's the area that more and more people are turning to. And that's the area that we've got to do better. And there's going to be a whole relaunch of the online website in the autumn. So that's work is 2/3 of the way down the line now, and it's coming to fruition. I'm looking forward to seeing some stuff on that next week, but it's going to be a lot better than now. I mean, our present website is frankly unsatisfactory. There's no other word for it, and we should have been getting on with it earlier. But we are where we are, and we'll make. So that's I think a little bit of the background to it. And in terms of trying to get a sense, I mean, this is a cross-cutting strategy because all parts of the council engage with citizens. It's not just the responsibility of Helen and her team to do that. So there's a cultural issue here about making sure that everybody does it really well. There's a training issue for some people who don't do it very well. And there's just that sense, you just know when it's working well. It's very fluid, it's responsive, it's pragmatic. When we get into trouble is when it becomes doctrinaire, ideological, narrow-minded, and then we just don't respond, we just don't flex right. And a lot of the complaints I get actually in my portfolio, interesting enough, are usually when we haven't flexed right. We've just taken a sort of narrow view of it, we've applied it to the letter, and then we haven't flexed right, and people just feel it's just unresponsive and it's not as relevant as it should be to their lives and their needs. And I think they've got every right to criticize us for that when they do that. So I think that's the context for me. Helen, would you like to add any more, maybe about how we're going to measure the success of it all? That's the big issue.
Is that okay, Chair, just to step in?
Yeah,
so as ever, Nigel's laid it out really well. One thing I would add is that in terms of the strategy itself, we have made sure that we've worked with colleagues to make sure that it aligns to the Thriving Community strategy, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Our equality strategy, inclusive economy, and our people strategies, because as Councillor Chapman's outlined, it's pervading. The difference between this strategy and previous ones is that it's much more cultural and is looking to make sure we're lining up both how we operate throughout that whole experience piece with other parts of the council, but also with partners and community groups. If I was going to give you the elevator pitch for what the strategy is, I think I would say it seeks to embrace the benefits of digital technology and automation, but enabling citizens to access specialists for those complex cases as required, but without leaving anybody behind, which I think is really important. So making sure that we've got a range of channels, including face-to-face, so that we can, make sure that we engage appropriately dependent on the nature of the situation. And I think the other thing which we need to improve on is the way that we use our data and insight. So whether that's to, continuously improve processes, understand what comments and complaints are actually telling us when they come through, but involving citizens in design upfront, which I think is one of the things that we've referenced it in the paper. When we're looking at the website redesign, we absolutely need to make sure that we're going out there and engaging with people before we launch any new version of the website, and also using data to spot trends and support decisions up front. So I think that's an area that we should improve on. And I think it's a long elevator pitch, so it goes a number of floors, but I think the other most important thing is that it's about working with partners, and I think that's particularly where it aligns with the Thriving Communities piece and community groups, making sure that it all sounds like stuff that it gets trolled out a lot, but really important that we're joining up, working throughout the council, but with people in the community and the county council and other partners for early prevention, and we're starting to see some of that in what we're doing. And I think that's really important. And just to finish off by saying, Nigel quite rightly said that it's built around 4 pillars. Just to say what we've done, we've picked those 4 pillars because they are the pillars of the customer service excellence accreditation. So we felt that gave some consistency through that customer service excellence piece into the strategy pillars, and then we've tried to show the actions in terms of those pillars as well, so you can see it sort of like from objectives through to strategy and then into delivery. So
great, thank you. Cool, we have lots of questions. So Alta, Mike, and then Ed, off you go.
As the cabinet member called, this is a quite wider citizen strategy, but in consultation, it says, the consultation visited community ladder, Roselle Barton, community champion forums at the museum and online diversity forum. So that looks to me is a very widely consulted. You have number of community centers, shopping districts like Headington, Summertown, Cowley Centre, a lot of other places, and diversity forum online, where it's not that you're not aware, you got in the report the diverse community data, and there's a 30 to 40% diverse city. So why, I wonder, online forum of diversity and only 2-3 things, and is not went to wider city, and that's better to me. It's not getting into the people in a larger number if you're not getting a first stage of consultation, and that means you won't have the different people's view on board because you haven't spoken to many people.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So just to say, we've, as you've outlined, we've been to those forums. We've also, we've done surveying of people that have phoned into the contact centre. So we've taken quite a broad piece with people that have actually rung into the contact centre, and everybody that comes to the Westgate Library, we've surveyed as well. So we have taken a broader view, and alongside that, we've spoken to representatives of the advice commissioning agencies that we work with, and officers and service areas across the whole organisation. So we've done quite a lot trying to make sure that we're covering all our bases. But I do take your point, and I think you'll see from the Equalities Impact Assessment, because it is such a wide-ranging strategy, I think we need to make sure that as we go into each work strand, we're doing an equalities impact assessment and making sure that we're taking soundings as we go along in a more detailed way, dependent on the piece of work that we're doing. So I do take what you're saying, but I think that would be a practical and hopefully a positive way to make sure that as we're dealing with each action, we're taking soundings as we go.
Great, thank you for that. Mike, did you want to come with your question?
Thanks. Yeah, well, two questions actually. First of all, the paragraphs 33 and on about the choice of language. Citizen maybe may exclude some of our communities, and just to point out, which I know Nigel and Helen, I'm sure, are very much on already, the importance of making sure that minority communities who may not be British citizens are included, and students are included. I mean, I know this is not actually a community inclusion strategy, but this is a strategy about the services, the interface between council services and citizens. But obviously that's important. But the question on that is, visitors, for example, may not feel they are citizens, and indeed, at the risk of sounding doctrinaire and narrow-minded, as Nigel said, what was the rationale for including short-term visitors to the city within that definition? And the second question was on, the customer satisfaction statistics seem to suggest very strongly that how happy people are with the council's services depends very much on how much contact they have had with one of our excellent officers, with almost everybody who came to a face-to-face interview being satisfied, but that being less than half if their only interaction with the council was via our website. And what message have we taken from that? That's it.
Well, on the last one, it's clear what the message is actually, which is that the website is not as good as it needs to be. And that's partly about the way it's laid out. I mean, it hasn't been revamped for years. It's very difficult to navigate, very difficult to find your way around to do a particular task. And that's a problem. So that's being addressed. So I'm not surprised it doesn't score so highly. The other thing is that, I mean, a lot of the people who come for the face-to-face work at the Westgate, I've been down there and watched, teams in action. Those people are coming with incredibly complicated, multi-dimensional issues, and they're really grateful, frankly, that someone's sitting down and giving them time and going through it in depth, try and find solutions in a way that, because other public services are under such strain at the moment, they can't get that service from other parts of it, which they may well have been able to in the past. I can think particularly in the NHS in that respect. So I think that's why the face-to-face scores so much more than the online at the moment. The issue, I mean, there's no one word that encompasses everything, but I think that citizen is a lot better than customer. I think citizen does encompass, as I said at the beginning, individuals, businesses, organizations, they're all run by citizens in the end. And actually the strapline helps that, because we've said for everyone that lives in, works in, or visits the city of Oxford. So lives in, I mean, technically speaking, there are people who are not citizens, technically, who live in the city, but they're still included. I wouldn't want to, discriminate or differentiate there whatsoever. I mean, other parts of the political system would like to, but I don't want to. So I'm very clear about that. I see somebody, to give you a very specific example, somebody who's seeking right to remain in this country, living in Oxford, I see them and treat them just the same as somebody who's lived here for ages in terms of the way the council should engage with them. So it's just a matter of kind of equality and justice, really, in the end.
Thanks,
There was
Helen. Did
another
you want
question?
to-
I'm sorry, which I didn't answer.
Go for it.
Can I just add as well, around the customer satisfaction stuff, which Councillor Rowley's talked about. So one of the things we're looking at, particularly at the moment around the contact centre, is making sure that we're asking a bit more specific questions so that we start to understand, how was the service that we've given you today and how can we improve that? And then try to disaggregate and some of the answers that we've given in terms of things that are maybe not in our gift in terms of service provision. How do we start to disaggregate that? Not because we want to improve our customer satisfaction, but we want to really get to the bones of what are the issues that are still leaving people dissatisfied. So I think there is some work. I don't know if I've explained that well enough, but I think you get the gist. That we just really need to try and disaggregate that a bit more and be a bit more intelligent about the nature of what we're asking so that we can make sure that we're really addressing anything that's wrong with the way we're delivering, but also what we're delivering to. So I think there is a piece of work around that too, Councillor, that we're on the case of trying to put in place at the moment as well.
May I just clarify briefly?
Yeah.
May I just clarify briefly, because obviously I completely agree with what Nigel said, and I would never dream of questioning. In fact, I think it's absolutely excellent that the strategy calls people citizens of Oxford, whether or not they are citizens of the United Kingdom. Everybody who lives and works here. My question was aimed at, are we saying that tourists are citizens of Oxford? Because that strikes me as an unusual definition of citizens, particularly mine maybe being narrow-minded.
I mean, they're not literally citizens of Oxford, no, but they come here and they take part in our life and they use our services. Obviously, it's much more transitory than people who are here all the time, but you don't want to completely ignore that, because actually they provide an awful lot of the economy. They're important about the vibrancy of the city, so they're part of that equation. I mean, are we going to have an extensive, massive consultation with people who come in and out of the city for a day? No, we're not. Let's be honest about that. We can't afford that, and that would be OTOs. But nor should we ignore the fact that we do provide services that are relevant to them, and the brand of Oxford is important here. You know, the brand of Oxford, if anybody comes into the city, whether it's for 24 hours or 24 years, and has a bad experience, then that affects the brand and perception. And, you know, one of the, I would say, few silver linings that has come out of COVID is how much the brand of Oxford has been enhanced globally, actually, over the last 2 or 3 years. It was already a very strong brand, but because of the amazing work in science and technology and medicine, now that brand is amazing, really. And therefore, we want to maintain that positive feeling about the city. So we don't want anybody coming here and going away and thinking they had a rotten time with us. That's the last thing we want.
Thanks. That's what I was going to follow up on as well. So you got there before. I think it was Ed next.
Thank you. So I was going to make a point similar to Mike about the terminology and how it could sort of impact how people are interpreting things. Obviously, you know, if somebody's having this document translated for them, the word citizen could have a bit of a loaded connotation. They might not feel they're included there. I mean, I just think, like, you know, perhaps this could go as a kind of recommendation, really, that obviously, you know, if you go customer, some people will think that's not right. You know, could we just say that if there are sort of issues that we notice arising from how people are interpreting the terminology that's used in the document, that could be used for a sort of future amending to that, and that we're sort of flexible about the way we potentially address this in the future. You know, so that if there are those kind of hurdles that get in people's way, or they feel that they're being excluded with the terminology, that perhaps that's taken forward. So yeah, I was going to say that. So and the other thing is, like, so obviously a lot of people are not necessarily, you know, coming to us at the first point of contact. You know, they've already got an issue and they've got someone that they should be aware that they're dealing with as a first point. And I just want to know really how this is being expressed in the document about being sure that residents, citizens, that they know who their point of contact is in relation to the issues that they're having and what they need resolved, what they can expect from that person, and what they can expect to happen when they're not satisfied with the outcomes that they're getting, and also in what circumstances relevant residents can be expecting to be hearing directly from us as the council about things that are impacting them, whether it be in terms of their housing or whatever it is. Thanks.
So thank you for your question. So I guess to start off with, people contact the contact centre. So we have about, I think last year, about 140,000 phone calls. And of course, in that contact centre, there are, I think it's like 16 services that we can do without referral to the back office. But of course, the team there are briefed for calls that actually they're not the specialist and don't have the wherewithal. So I guess there's that, and that flows into the face-to-face service that's currently at the Westgate, and indeed the localities network that we're putting together. So I think there's a bit of a hybrid, if you like. We can, some of which, when it comes into the council, we've got a means of triaging and filtering if it's not dealt with by the contact centre or the forward-facing team. I think that's what's really important about the work we're doing in the locality networks. What we're trying to do is to make sure that the community groups that exist, that they understand what we do as well, because I'm telling you, I'm sure you know better than me, for some people that's their first point of contact. So I think it's really important, the work that we're doing, to make sure that we are making it clear and to those groups what we do, what referral looks like. I think the work that we're doing at the moment in the Westgate, so we're co-locating there with Citizens Advice Oxford. It's been a real revelation, even though when we were in St Aldate's, Citizens Advice were, as you know, just down the road. The number of people that we referred that came out of our contact centre and probably didn't turn right when they should have done. Whereas now, because we're co-locating, that referral's a lot better. And that's just a small example, but I think shows the power of working collaboratively across a whole network of people. So I think it's trying to get that message out there. So I don't know if that is a bit of a hybrid, I guess, answer to that. We're not the only fish in the sea, are we? So it's not just what we do at the City Council.
But it's important we work with the partners. So let's say on debt advice would be a good example. I mean, there are community advice centres that we help fund, but we don't want them to work in splendid isolation from the work that we do as a council and vice versa. Because often some of these issues are really complicated and require a really quite painstaking plan to tackle over time. I mean, council house debt would be a good example. Council house rent debt would be a good example of that, where I think the team are really painstaking about trying to give people a realistic plan to improve the situation and not just let the debt spiral out of control. But not all the levers of what's causing that debt are the council. There are other financial pressures on people, and therefore you've got to get a more holistic view, and you've got to work with other partners to do that. Just in terms of the issue of consultation generally, I mean, I was thinking about who are the stakeholders. That's the question I asked myself on any policy, and therefore have we worked that out? Have we gone and talked to those people? Has it changed anything? Has it modified anything? Have we listened? I think we heard the phrase ticking the boxes earlier on tonight. I heard from Councillor Khan and I think actually consultation is and he wasn't saying this, but the risk is it does just becoming ticking the boxes. And that's really no good. If it's just ticking the boxes, it's not going to improve anything. I'm being frank. So I would like to see greater depth of conversation. A lot of that is qualitative, by the way, not quantitative. It's not about the number of people you talk to, it's about the quality of the conversations you have with them And really interesting, as we all know as councillors, really interesting conversation with our constituents. A relatively small number can change the way we think about an issue in our ward quite fundamentally. And that is the same principle here, as far as I'm concerned, just on the council level rather than on a very local level. So I think that's the spirit of it. And so I think officers have to ask themselves that question all the time. And if they don't think they have consulted widely and deeply enough, then they need to pause and get stuck into it, frankly, and do some more. You know, some of our consultation feedback, which is largely written and largely online, is quite thin, I would say, and I don't think you can rely on that as much. I think there's a balance between the face-to-face conversation. The reason why focus groups exist because they're largely face-to-face conversations, and they are deep, and you really start to understand after time just how things might improve. And that's why I think we should do more of that, frankly. And so the residents' panel is important in this context to be revived. And, you know, the way the communities teams reach out to different and diverse communities in the city and have those sit-down conversations, I think are really, really important.
Helen was suggesting that she wanted to come back in with an extra, yes.
Just something else that I should have mentioned. We've got something called a community solutions database, which we've pulled together internally around all the different community groups, volunteers, etc., that all help to make up part of the solution for individuals when they've got an issue. So it could be anything to how can I get my grass cut to, you know, it is one of the things that springs to mind. And actually what we're doing is we're sharing that, or we intend to share that across the organisation, because that's all about sharing knowledge. And actually I think, you know, first conversations that we've had with the county, they'd be really interested to see that. And I think that's all part of it, is trying to make sure that we're joining up the knowledge that we've got and not just keeping it to ourselves. So sorry, I should have mentioned that in my response. Yeah.
That's good, thank you. I mean, I was hoping for a bit more specific information really about the people who know where they're going. They've already got the phone number, perhaps even directly with an individual, you know, how they ensure that they are getting the service that they need and that they're getting the information that they are that they have access to, or that they should have access to, rather than people who, you know, are being signposted elsewhere. I'm talking about people who have direct contacts within the council and what their avenues are for getting the service they deserve out of that, and how, you know, then knowing where to go. I mean, they come to us as councillors, of course, but, you know, knowing what their rights are really in terms of what they're, you know, with regards to our people. Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry, misunderstood. So we've got customer service standards, and each part of the business. So for example, if you're phoning for the benefit, you know what the standards are there, which say it's a 10-day turnaround for a change of circumstance, or 28 days for a new claim, for example, in that instance. I think one of the things that has come out of the customer service excellence accreditation that we were awarded again in February is that we need to go back and be tighter on that. So there is a piece of work that's in the action plan about reviewing customer service standards across the organisation, making sure that we're being clear about setting expectations. So yeah, I don't know if that goes in part, but you can imagine there's a whole raft of them that exist across the organisation. But that is a piece of work that we need to do.
If I guess add one other thing, obviously you hope that through all of that work people are satisfied. If they're not, there are well-established procedures in which they can complain. At different levels of complaint can go in, and you know, I think it's a healthy organisation that has a reasonable number of complaints coming in. If you had no complaints coming in, it wouldn't sort of smell right to me. Do you know what I mean, Edward? You know, because there are things we get wrong sometimes, and we know as councillors that a lot of those trickier cases come to us. Actually, to be honest, because people kind of have given up with the other means, and they just want some help, either to navigate around the system or to get what they felt was an unsatisfactory response remedied. And that's something that, you know, we do, but we've got to make sure that officers have to understand, you know, what's a good level of service and what's an inadequate one, and just not brush people off. I don't know about you, but I get most irritated as a council when I get cases where I can feel that the council has brushed off people a bit somewhere in the process and hasn't really listened deeply to what they wanted and has wished they just go away because they're a nuisance. And I just don't see it that way at all. They're not a nuisance. They've got rights as citizens to get the best possible service once they're paying for it. It's really quite straightforward. And therefore, we've got to really work hard to eradicate cases where that might happen and give people the means to complain and complaints to be looked at impartially and independently and get redressed that way if it really comes down to it. You hope it doesn't come down to that very often. Sometimes it will, though, as all large organisations, it will sometimes happen. And we need to have the right safeguards in place to make sure people have that right to redress. And we should maybe put that more promptly on the website, and we could also make it a bit more of it in the strategy, I think, going forward.
Cool. So I think we had Tiago, and then Chris, you'll be there. Tiago.
Okay, first, thank you very much for this report. I think it was very, I enjoy very much to read a lot of good things. We are in the right directions, and we are accessing what we need in the new the digital era. When I read the report, I feel, and especially I will focus in one point, is in council customer service. When I see the numbers, online form submissions, telephone calls, and face-to-face, I feel, and especially when I see the assessment, when they said face-to-face is 97% satisfied, we can say that. And of course, 80% of the phones and 41 the site. I think we know we need to improve our site, what is good. What I'm a little, and I think it's important, like said the report, we need to go faster in the digital era. What does mean the relationship from the citizens and the council changed too fast? What does mean the new generation want, of course, to sort it out issues, but not coming to the council to sort issues. And I think this is an important thing, and I think the data show we are in these directions. But I think Councillor Nigel said one thing is very important. We need to balance, because as we see in the report, one part of the people still struggle with all this new era. We can say that what is meaning. And when I said 4,000 face-to-face inquiries, I would like to understand if you have any measures to try to understand if you are inclusive enough, because when you see 4,000 inquiries is almost 80 per week, potential average of 16 per day. I'm not sure really if we can compare benchmarking with other councils to try to understand if we are going too fast in one direction, but if we are still give the right support and the right service for the residents are struggling with these new eras. This is what I'm trying. You could understand my question? This is only trying to understand, because of course 4,000 inquiries don't say too much. When we see the graphic, we'll see that. But I try to understand if we still the council still inclusive for the residents struggle with all these new technologies and so on. This is my question.
Well, I think we are. I think that the fact we have the range of options, if we were to really downscale face-to-face opportunity and telephony, then we wouldn't be inclusive, because they're in some ways our old technologies, if you like, and the digital world is the new one. I mean, the other thing is that we've got to work with communities and NGOs and other organizations to upskill people where we possibly can to acquire those skills to work in a digital age. And that then comes back to your, where it's not my portfolio, but I mean, it comes back to community strategy, it comes back to the way you disperse your grants. Are you supporting organizations which are doing that in local parts of the city where digital disadvantage is higher than in other parts? And I think we've got to check that really. I think I'm not running the community strategy, but for me, if I was, bridging that divide and working really hard with organizations and working to do that would be very, very high on my list of priorities, because increasingly now you are just completely disenfranchised by many organizations, not us, if you can't do things online. I mean, you know, I was give you a very quick example. I was dealing with a resident in my ward who wants to apply for a blue badge. And he asked me, could he get the paper form to fill in? And I discovered from the county council he can't. So the only way he can do it is either go online, which he isn't able to do because he doesn't have the technology or the skills or the broadband, or to ring, you know, a telephone number and hope that somebody's going to be there to take him through it, which will be quite a long conversation. Do you see what I mean? And that, you know, that's not great, frankly. Some people can bridge that divide if you give them the skills and opportunity. Some can't, and they need to be helped and assisted in a more traditional way. But you've got to have enough of that capacity to do it well. So you can't have people waiting on the phone forever. If they're using the old methods, as I call it, of contact, they've got to be able to come through pretty quickly and have that conversation. So I'm absolutely with you in spirit, and it's not a precise science. It's a kind of judgment about what the balance of investment is between traditional means and more modern means. I think over time, more and more people, Chug, which is what your question implies, will be expecting more and more from the digital universe from us, and therefore we've got to invest in that. But we mustn't. We're not in a position, and I suspect we never will be in a position to switch off and say the customer, you know, call centers only open 2 days a week or that sort of thing. I just don't see that ever happening, frankly. Helen, do you agree with me, or would you like to keep it down to 2 days a week?
No, is that all right if I just... Yes, yeah. So absolutely. And I think just the other thing to say is that the 4,000 are people that have come into the Westgate Library and seen us. But that doesn't include, we've got a raft of tenancy management officers, for example, so it doesn't include those people that the tenancy management officers are seeing and obviously dealing with quite a lot of the time face to face. And so just trying to put that in context. And just the other thing to say is that, and again, it's in the paper, is that we've started to do a piece of work with Activate Learning based at Blackbird Leys. All around. I mean, I'm sure you probably know that they've got amazing facilities at the campus there, which we're hoping to avail ourselves of, and their resources to try and tap into their ability to help citizens improve their employability, largely through improving digital skills, for example. And so I think there's a seam of work there that we're starting to scope with them, where we could maybe reach out in that instance to the residents in the Leeds area and see if we can help people to become a bit more digitally enabled. So that's just an example where I think we need to be doing a bit more of that, but working. We don't have the skill set, but trying to sort of plug into what exists in the community, which is probably under-tapped at the moment. So I don't know that part answer, but yeah.
So I think we should probably move on to recommendations soon, but Chris, I know you had a question. Maybe if we can keep it reasonably brief.
It's very brief. From memory, from the annual monitoring report, I believe it was one of our key results, or I'm not sure what phrasing we use, key performance indicators, one of those, to divert as much customer interaction, public interaction towards online and away from the call center, for the obvious reason that it's labor intensive. Is that still something we're explicitly pursuing? And if so, how's it going? Are we making progress on that front?
So actually that is one of the corporate indicators that's in my service plan. So great question. So at this year we're focusing on housing benefit, housing applications. So we've really targeted that in that KPI. So colleagues in the revenues and benefits team are looking at quite an advanced online form, which will mean that when the customer fills out a change of circs, it will go straight through without anybody touching it. Now at the moment, they're intervening, so they're trying to make sure that it works. If that happens, then obviously that's got huge implications for stuff that's actually coming all the way through without anybody touching it. In the housing space, we're currently starting to test the online portal where people will be in a very narrow way at the moment, where people will be able to go on and log their repairs online themselves. So that's the direction of travel, and we've got a KPI which is hoping that that our telephone and face-to-face will go down, and in those areas, and our digital interactions will go up. So that's the plan. So yeah, watch this space, but we've tried to be specific this year because it's really hard to measure that when you're looking in the generality. So we've tried to just look at those areas when we're actually reporting our KPIs. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Thanks. So I think we can move on to recommendations. There was one around that use of the term citizen, and I think a kind of recommendation about reflecting on the impact that it has, maybe, or reflecting on how people engage with it.
It's clearly been a big run from it several times already, though, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if I don't know if I'm putting words into your mouth, but I wonder if the recommendation was also about, I guess, ongoing feedback from people about whether they feel included in it, because we're not saying poo-poo it now, because we obviously, I don't know, I'm not someone who might feel excluded by the word citizen, but for people that do, is that actually, are we just worrying about it, or is it something that's worrying them as well?
Yeah, it's not a recommendation to say, let's keep going on about this terminology. It's, let's ensure that we're listening to feedback and listening to the residents and citizens and other people who are reading this document and impacted by it and what their views are. And have, yeah, and yeah.
Then perhaps we can just incorporate that into a broader, could there be a report back to Scrutiny in a year or so on, this is a brand new strategy, it would be good to get a check-in on how it's going.
I mean, I wonder if it would be worth having a specific recommendation on it, because I think it's quite a key point that Edward's raised, and I wonder if we could put something, maybe not in the report, but something in there about obviously the context, the wider I don't know, as really words we can, in the wider context of particularly how people might be feeling due to the hostile environment at the moment. I think, there's a new story today about them removing paintings from children's rooms in places where they're supporting asylum seekers. People are feeling pretty excluded. It's pretty shocking. That's obviously not City Council, that's Robert Jenrick. Sorry to clarify. But I think particularly in that context, it's something we've got to consider, if that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. I think the terminology is difficult here. There's no single word that captures everything. I think citizens, as we've discussed before, is much better than customer. That's why my portfolio has a different title from the one it used to have. But we need to monitor it, we need to see, and we don't want people to feel excluded exactly, and that's the last thing we want. So as we test it and we use it, we'll pick up whether that's happening, and we'll have to adapt and or explain sometimes, frankly, why we're using that language. It's not meant to be excluding people and so on and so forth. So I think a recommendation, I'm sure if you put that forward, I'd be happy to accept that.
Great, let's have one to monitor responses to the word use of citizen instead of customer. Great. Were there any others, or was that that one, and just report back annually?
Yeah, on the reporting back, you'll see there's a reference chair in the report, because I rather anticipated you would be asking for that. So, and I asked for it as well, because I think it's really important to have an annual review of these things. So I've asked for one as the portfolio holder, and so that we can use as the basis to come back to you and show you the good things that are going on and things that we're still grappling with and maybe not going so well in a warts and all way.
Yeah, Alice says it doesn't need to be an actual recommendation, because we can just request it when it comes up at that point. So that's fine. Okay, are we all good on that item? Was there anything else to raise? Cool. Okay. Thank you, Nigel and Helen. That's been really helpful. The The next thing, we've just got to go back to some of the stuff that was at the beginning of the agenda that we skipped over when we switched the order around. So I'm going to hand over to Alice to talk about the work plan and forward plan.
Thank you. So the forward plan was updated and published yesterday. So I have circulated a couple of hard copies on the desks, and it is available on the council's website. But in summary, so the item that was suggested for August committee, the Central Conservation Area Appraisal Report, has actually slipped, so it won't be ready for August. So that needs to come off the work plan for now. So the committee does need to confirm whether it wishes to consider any reports in August. The reports that are currently tracking to August Cabinet are the letting of Cardigan House, Housing First Acquisition Programme, Fire Servicing and Maintenance Contract, Bertie Place Affordable Housing Scheme, and the Northfield Hostel Sites Additional Affordable Housing. The officer recommendation based on those is that actually the August meeting can be cancelled due to no business, as a lot of those reports are actually deemed to be quite operational in nature. And the Housing First Acquisition Programme is due to go to Housing Panel, so it wouldn't come to main committee as well. For the September meeting, there are 3 cabinet items currently listed on the forward plan. That's the grant allocations, developing a sustainable building control service, and the delivery of a new burial space. But we have seen some additional items be added to this forward plan for September, so the committee may wish to switch things up a little bit. In particular, there's the delivery of the EV infrastructure for Oxford report. The committee could suggest that this is considered by the Climate and Environment Panel if it so wished, because it would fall under that sort of remit. There's the park and ride combined parking and bus ticket charges, and the out of hospital care team provision. So the committee will need to sort of look at which reports it wants for September. The committee also needs to give consideration to any scrutiny commission work for this year, so that can be scheduled in. There's currently no suggestions for the main committee, but equally the committee can raise suggestions as and when they arise. It doesn't have to be today or never. There's also a number of standard and regular items that the committee could consider. So the committee is asked to agree whether to request that I schedule in updates for the tourism review group, the domestic abuse review group. There's also the child poverty review group, but it's not recommended that an update would come this year, given that the cabinet has only very recently agreed its formal response.
Thanks, Alice. So yeah, I think that recommendation that we don't need to have an August meeting for the main scrutiny panel. The only thing I was going to say is, Lizzie, I was going to pick up with you about housing panel and whether they might want to look. You might want to look at the Bertie Place affordable housing scheme, as it's a little bit a controversial topic. It might be one, but we can pick that up afterwards potentially.
Yeah, I think it just depends, because it's
yeah, we could discuss that afterwards, but I think we probably is everyone happy if we don't have the August meeting, as there isn't much business? Great. In terms of September, do we have to make a decision?
Ideally.
Yes, okay. Does anyone have strong feelings about the items which have been suggested? I think the EV infrastructure one going to Climate Environment Panel sounds like it makes sense. I think our choice would be between the delivery of new burial space and the out of hospital care team provision items. Which ones does anyone have particular views on which ones they'd like to discuss?
Burial space, I think, would be quite important, because there are a number of groups waiting, and the space running out at the Vulvar Court and Bottley, I know. So there is quite community attentions towards it, and they wanted to see the progress on that. So something I think would be good to bring here.
Okay, yeah, happy to go with that if no objections. To go with the burial space one. Great. Yes, Alice, do you want to give a background?
Yeah, so as I understand it, the team is providing a current service, and it's to get approval for extending that service following funding from the ICB. So it's something that's currently being offered that they're looking to extend.
Yeah, okay, in that case.
Something that would be considered by another.
So the park and ride one, again, it's looking to make permanent a 12-month trial. So it's not a change per se, it's just to make a trial permanent.
Is it something that you'd consider?
Personally, it seems like the other, we don't have time to discuss everything. That one seems less consequential than some of the other ones.
Yeah.
Chris, were you going to come in?
No, I agree.
Yeah. Are we happy to go with burial space then? Is that, yeah, let's do that. I did, whilst we were talking earlier, have one thought about scrutiny commissioned work, which was, there was obviously a lot of stuff happening around the adult exploitation and stuff, and I don't know if that's something that we could look at in more detail. But yeah, we obviously don't have to decide on that right now, but if anyone has thoughts and feelings on that, let me and Alice know.
No, it's just to agree with standing.
Yes. We then just also have to look at the standing sort of regular items that come to scrutiny. Are we all happy if we have an update from the tourism review group and the potentially the domestic abuse review group, which we also sort of asked for already, and happy that we don't have one from the child poverty review group because they've only recently agreed things.
Preservation Trust, which it is on, which I think is owns the land that the burial space is on.
I assume you need to do that in the next meeting.
I don't need to register it for the work plan. Okay, well, in the interest of all transparency, there you go.
Okay. But yeah, are we, those review groups, are we happy to have reports from tourism and domestic abuse, but not child poverty?
Because child poverty isn't ready yet.
Well, yeah, we don't really have, I don't think there is an update because they've only just been agreed.
Yeah,
We're literally about to discuss the recommendations, responses to those. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Perfect. I think we finished that item then. So yeah, the next item is the report back on recommendations. So on 14th of June, Cabinet considered recommendations on some reports that came from scrutiny on the housing management system implementation. All of our recommendations were agreed, which is very nice. On the child poverty review group, it's a slightly more mixed picture. So Cabinet agreed its formal response to the 42 recommendations that the review group had, and which were initially submitted in June 2022. We got written responses on those, but we didn't get any specific indication of whether each of those recommendations was agreed, partially agreed, or not agreed, which has made it slightly difficult to sort of see what the Cabinet has committed to doing. So it's pleasing that there were some, positive responses there, but I think particularly around the idea of having a dedicated poverty strategy and also around kind of the socioeconomic duty, it was quite unclear, and I don't think, personally speaking, I don't think the Cabinet sort of did commit to take on quite a lot of those recommendations, which is disappointing. There isn't any formal procedure for us to be able to go back on that and scrutiny. We've kind of put recommendations in and we've had a response, but maybe we can just all note that they weren't all accepted. But yes, if anyone had questions around that, if not, we can move on to scrutiny panel ones. Cool. Mike, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about scrutiny panel, company scrutiny panel.
Thanks. Well, I've been asked not to go into confidential matters in this meeting, so that there's only been one meeting of the panel along with the shareholder group, and that somewhat limits what I can say. Being the only public item was on BUD, and the number of there was some helpful input by scrutiny members on that. The one thing that came out of it, to my mind, and I don't know if a recommendation or request would be appropriate, is that, and I know some thought has been given to this, we need to be, I think we need to be firming up what, because the questions were about the infrastructure, the future of the infrastructure and communal areas in places, specifically on Barton, but it also applies to Oxford West End, to Grenoble Road when the joint venture is done. When the joint venture is dissolved, what the future is of looking after and meeting costs for the infrastructure and communal areas. And I know there's been quite a bit of thought by officers on this, but I do think it needs to be firmed up, and whether it would be appropriate to request, I know there are confidentiality issues, but at least an indication of where we have got to on the different joint ventures of this, and whether we are developing a common strategy, or whether the joint ventures are all so different that there will have to be a bespoke solution for each one.
Yeah, that's really useful. Can maybe consider requesting that report. I'm handing over to Alice to report back on climate and environment, because Alex can't be here.
Thank you. Yeah, so the Climate and Environment Panel held its first meeting of the year on the 27th of June. This year's membership is Councillor Hollingsworth as chair, and we've got Councillor Dunn, Councillor Kerr and Councillor Miles. At the meeting, the panel considered its work plan for the year ahead, agreeing to focus on a number of themes alongside consideration of relevant cabinet reports and a number of standing items as per the panel's scope, which was agreed by the committee last year. The areas of focus proposed are tree planting and maintenance, energy generation and solar potential on council buildings, air pollution, retrofit, a strategic look at council policies, projects and actions, and depending on government timescales, waste. In addition, the panel considered the draft carbon reduction and sustainable retrofit guidance for historic buildings, technical advice note, and received a biodiversity update presentation. The discussion was quite wide-ranging and constructive, and it led to the formulation of 7 recommendations on the technical advice note and 4 recommendations on the biodiversity update item, all of which will be submitted to Cabinet for formal responses in July. For the technical advice note, the recommendations centred on accessibility, use of examples and best practice, and the council looking to be a bit more actively supportive of retrofit applications. And then for the biodiversity recommendations, they were around collaboration towards improved biodiversity, best practice, and suggesting the addition of a dedicated biodiversity work stream within ZCOP.
Great, thank you. If we don't have further questions and comments, can we all just note responses to recommendations and the updates from panel meetings? Great. Final item then, can everyone note the committee, the dates that we're meeting in future? And if, oh yeah, noting as well that there's not one in August now. And if you've all done that, we can finish.